Well, joining me to discuss the new appointments are former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense Larry Korb, now a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress; Clifford May, National Security Analyst and President of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies; and Hilary Mann Leverett, a former U.S. State Department official and also co-author of a new book, Going to Tehran, Why the United States Must Come to Terms with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Well, Hillary, let me start with you. Sure. You know, we certainly had the warnings in the last few days coming from Capitol Hill that there was opposition to this nomination of Chuck Hagel for Secretary of Defense. So what was the calculus of the White House to go ahead with this?
Well, I would take the president at his word that he likes and trusts former Senator Hagel, got to know him in the Senate, likes and trusts his positions and his candor on a range of issues. But I think the calculus to go ahead, and in the way that they're going ahead, is that Senator Hagel, for all of the, in a way, courageous positions he's taken on Iran, on Israel, Hamas, lots of issues, that he will assure his fellow senators that those are positions that he held as a senator, and they really will not have very much to do with his position as Secretary of Defense. Those are all issues, those are quintessential foreign policy issues which will be carried out by the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor, which is something that we really haven't gotten into. The entire cabinet selection, I know we'll get into some of the other appointments like John Brennan at CIA later in the show, but Obama now has an all-white male cabinet. The question is, how long will his National Security Advisor stay, Tom Donilon? And there I would say, I would put a question whether Susan Rice will be back on the scene. And she will certainly constrain Hagel's attempts, if he has any desire to make these attempts to change policy. So my bottom line is, I think that Hagel has some courageous positions, the White House knows that, but they also think he's going to be a good Secretary of State and do quintessentially Secretary of Defense, and do quintessentially Secretary of Defense things, not foreign policy.
Well, let's take a look at some of those positions so that we can kind of use that as a springboard as we move forward. Now, Chuck Hagel has been criticized by Republicans for being, quote, outside mainstream thinking on most foreign policy issues. So, where does he stand? Well, Hagel initially supported the U.S.-led war in Iraq, but later sharply was criticized how that war was managed. And as a senator, Hagel called unilateral sanctions on Iran counterproductive. But he has supported some sanctions and also endorsed labeling Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism. Now, Hagel's support for the U.S.'s biggest ally, Israel, has come under scrutiny. Many Republicans point to comments he made in 2008 when he said, quote, the Jewish lobby intimidates a lot of people up here, referring to Capitol Hill. Now, on the flip side, he's also voted in favor of billions of dollars in military aid to Israel. And after the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. government began monitoring some Americans without their knowledge. As a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Hagel defended the government's actions, saying it struck a, quote, delicate but effective balance. Well, Hagel supported a U.S. involvement in NATO forces in Kosovo during that country's war in 1999 as well. So there are some of the positions as they're outlined there. Clifford May, I want to ask you, though, when you look at those stacked against each other, they don't seem as controversial as they're being portrayed.
Probably true, although we're here today because this is a controversial nomination and in a lot of ways a curious one, and not so much for the reasons you said. Let me just bring in a couple of other things that I think we should consider at this table. One is, anytime managing the Pentagon is a very difficult job to do. It's going to be particularly difficult over the next 4 years because of the cuts that have to come down the pike. Chuck Hagel has never managed a large organization. He's never managed anything larger than a Senate office.
Isn't he a self-made millionaire, though? I mean, that would certainly speak to some of his business experience.
Well, you have to show me what organizations, large organizations that he did manage and how he made his money. As a senator, you may also want to educate me. What were his foreign policy and national security achievements? Not just what did he endorse or what did he denounce, but what did they actually do? Senator Lugar, Senator Nunn. You can think of all sorts of legislation and policy they originated. I don't think he originated any. I don't think that he was notable in that regard, or probably any other during his tenure. I'm sure he's a lovely guy and a nice guy. I think it's important that President Obama has a close relationship with him. It's important that any president has close relations with his cabinet. He very openly criticized a gay ambassador for being gay, and a lot of people on the left A lot of people in the Democratic Party are uncomfortable with his position, the position he took on that. There are any number of Republicans that could have been picked by President Obama that would have given bipartisan support for a nomination. He's the one Republican I think that President Obama could pick that would not have Republican support and doesn't have support from quite a few Democrats as well. You talk about Iraq.
He does have key support on Capitol Hill. You look at the Senate Intelligence Committee, Dianne Feinstein, Carl Levin, head of the Armed Services Committee. I mean, these are some key people on Capitol Hill that hold a lot of power and clout.
Kerry is going to float through his confirmation hearings. I think John maybe will disagree. I think John Brennan is likely to float through. Had President Obama nominated, say, Michelle Flournoy, for the first time it would be a woman Secretary of Defense. She's probably got the highest ranking woman right now in the Pentagon, who's worked there for years, knows the building very well, knows the organization. She's quite brilliant. She's a Democrat. Democrats would have been happy. Republicans would have been happy.
She doesn't have any combat experience, though. Larry Korb, maybe you want to jump in here.
The Pentagon is a civilian organization. Combat experience is not necessarily what
I would talk to a lot of the rank and file who actually have fought, who say that a lot of what you learn in combat can't be learned in a textbook. I'll let Larry jump in and respond to your
Did Panetta have
arguments.
Combat experience, and was Panetta a good Secretary
Well, maybe that's
of
why
Defense?
the president is making this
If
kind
you
of
want to
selection.
say that the argument is that he served in Vietnam and therefore he's qualified to be Secretary of Defense, go ahead and make it. But I think it's an unusual argument. I don't think it's one that's going to be made by the president or most of Hagel's supporters.
Larry?
Let me put it this way. Why did he pick Hagel? Because he is head and shoulders above any other candidate. You talked about no management experience. How much did Cheney have? Cheney came right from the legislature, had no experience in the private sector. Was a very good Secretary of Defense. Melvin Laird, same way, came from the House, very effective Secretary of Defense. He's got legislative experience. Okay, he's got management experience. Among other things, he rescued the USO from bankruptcy. I happen to be on the board. That was not an easy type of thing to do. And let me tell you something else about combat experience, okay? When you're in the building, as they say, and I was there, and you want the military to do something they don't want, if you've been there, they pay attention. I know. I can give you an example. I'm trying to do something with the military retirement system, which is getting, really out of control. And when I went to the meeting and explained why we needed to cut it, this admiral said, nobody will join. I said, Admiral, when I came into the Navy, I didn't even know you had a retirement system. When you're 20, you don't think you're going to be 30. He said, you were in the Navy? I said, yeah. He said, why don't you tell us? What'd you do? I said, I was a naval flight officer. Oh, we would have paid attention to you. And
so you think they're going to pay attention to him as a result of the fact he's
when you're
better.
there, they pay attention to you. The military is like a brotherhood or a priesthood or whatever your thing is, and if you've been part of it, and he's got more Purple Hearts than all of his 23 predecessors combined. And he was an enlisted man. All the other people who were in the military were officers. He was an enlisted. The signal that will send to the men is incalculable. And if you talk about the other candidates, sure, some of them have. Michelle Flournoy worked in the Pentagon for 4 or 5 years. We've never had anybody from that position go up. Cap Weinberger, my boss, was very good. Well, you know what he did before? He was Secretary of HEW, and he came in. So this idea that you got it, no. But he comes in there with a head start above any other, possible candidate. Now, will he be successful? It really depends. I've seen people come in there with a lot, like Rumsfeld should have been he was terrible, okay, because he overplayed his hand. But if you look around, is it going to be tough? Sure. But if you're the president, you want somebody there who can help you do your job, okay? And I think that's important. You talk about going to war. You talk about getting troops out. He can say, let me tell you what's involved. You can't do this. You should do that. And you have credibility on the issue.
But he certainly is getting blowback, Hillary, with regard to the statements that he made, putting U.S. interests before Israel's interests. Right. That's not a very popular position on Capitol Hill.
Certainly not. And you can look at the record when he voted against sanctions. He was maybe at times 1 or 2 of 100 senators to vote against sanctions.
But he voted for multilateral, not unilateral. And I think
there are distinctions that I agree with. I completely agree with. But what I think is really important is that the hopes for Senator Hagel and the concerns for Senator Hagel, I think are both overblown. Senator Hagel, if he's defense secretary, and the entire national security team will have a series of crises come on their watch. These nuclear talks, if they go forth with Iran, are not going to solve the problem that we have with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And if he is Secretary of Defense, now former Senator Hagel is not going to be able to solve them by saying, well, just give them a little bit more relief. That's not going to solve the problem. I don't know if he has a vision to actually deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran and the dramatic changes that we see in the Middle East and what is happening to American power. But even if he had that vision, you need a president and a national security advisor who could work with him and a Secretary of State. We haven't seen that in the first term of the Obama administration, and I'm not sure we can hang all this on whether Hagel is going to be Secretary of Defense or not.
Cliff, do you think that some of the problem that Hagel is facing is the fact, though, that he does depart from the Republican Party quite often on key issues, key policy issues, and that's, maybe even some retaliation perhaps for his position, say, on the Iraq War, or any of the number of the issues that he's not really gone lockstep with the Republican Party?
Well, if you say, I don't think it's retaliation. If somebody disagrees with your policies and you disagree with his, I think you have the right to say, I question that person's judgment. So if you take the Iraq War, he voted for the Iraq War. Then he became disenchanted with the Iraq War, was very outspoken about that. Then he decided that the surge was a bad idea. I would argue that the surge saved the United States from a humiliating defeat at the hands of al-Qaeda in Iraq. So I think his judgment was wrong in that. But there's no question, if you pick the one former Republican senator who does not see eye to eye with most members of his party, you're not going to get a lot of bipartisan support and agreement. So if one of the purposes here was to say on national security, on matters of defense, we should have bipartisan agreement, then this nomination is a failure because what you have is bipartisan dissent from the president's position. I'm not saying he won't be confirmed. I think he probably will be. I also agree with much of what Hillary just said. After all, it's up to the president to make policies, and I think Hagel's enough of a professional. He'll go along. That said, I also think American policy under the Obama administration is floundering on the Middle East, on Iran, on many issues. And I don't think he will make a net contribution by coming to the president and saying, as your advisor, let me give you some good guidance. I think, again, he's a good man. He comes with Purple Hearts. He was an enlisted man. I think we should thank him for his service. But at the Pentagon, which is meant to be headed by a civilian, I don't think he brings the policy experience, judgment, or a record of accomplishment that President Obama would be well served to have.
Well, can I just say, and I think
many
are hoping that at least Hagel will stop another march to a needless war in the Middle East on Iran. I think many are hopeful for that. But we need to keep in mind.
Do you think Obama's marching to war? Because I don't really think
I think he's on a trajectory toward war that he is not taking us off of. We are on the path to war. But the problem is that people forget Secretary of Defense Gates, who was considered to have bipartisan support, wide respect, not only in the Pentagon, the CIA, by Republicans and Democrats, he had to resign with the intervention in Libya. His opposition to our intervention in Libya did not stop our intervention in Libya. So even if Hagel takes that, what I would think, courageous and correct position to try to urge caution against going to war, to disarm a country of weapons of mass destruction it doesn't have yet again, we have an experience with
Well, wait a
Gates.
second. You don't know anything about Hagel. Do you know he resigned from the Veterans Administration? When I worked with him in the Reagan administration.
I know that. I do know something about him. You don't have to speak to me that way. I do understand him.
But you said he wouldn't resign.
I didn't say he wouldn't resign. I'm saying that Gates resigned. So I'm saying
When did Gates resign?
Gates resigned after the Libya intervention. He told Charlie Rose just 2 months ago that he opposed it and resigned.
He didn't leave until several months after it.
He just told Charlie Rose.
Well, he didn't leave. Let me tell you something about Gates was wrong about Russia.
Hagel may resign, but the point and the question and concern I have is that being opposed to another war doesn't necessarily stop it.
I think if I may, I think the worst thing is that in some ways this makes war more likely rather than less. And for the reason that if you're Ali Khamenei, you're the supreme leader of Iran, right now you're breaking open, not champagne because they don't drink champagne there, but the pomegranate juice, because this is somebody who is as likely to be soft on you as anybody that could have been.
I was just in Iran. They're not holding up any hope. They're not holding up any hope.
I don't think we're going to get any consensus here, which may be sort of a window into what we're going to see on Capitol Hill when it comes time for this hearing.
Exactly.
But let's turn to the other appointment by Barack Obama, his nominee for director of the CIA. Now, in a moment, we will hear from our correspondent, Rosalind Jordan. But first, here's what Obama had to say about John Brennan.
For the last 4 years, as my advisor for counterterrorism and homeland security, John developed and has overseen our comprehensive counterterrorism strategy. He understands we are a nation of laws. In moments of debate and decision, he asks the tough questions, and he insists on high and rigorous standards. Time and again, he's spoken to the American people about our counterterrorism policies, because he recognizes we have a responsibility to be open and transparent as possible.
When Barack Obama was elected in 2008 and was trying to put together his national security team, he wanted to name John Brennan to be his director of the CIA. However, that nomination never came to pass because there was ample criticism of Brennan at the time that he did not do enough to stop enhanced interrogation during the Bush administration. However, Obama felt that Brennan's advice and counsel on counterterrorism issues would be very important to him, and so he named him to a post that would not require congressional confirmation, counterterrorism advisor inside the White House. Now that Leon Panetta, the defense secretary, is ready to retire, the president has decided that he's going to put his original first choice in the job, of course, assuming that members of the U.S. Senate confirm him.
Rosalind Jordan reporting there. Larry Korb, I'll start with you on this one. You know, how much is the connection of John Brennan to interrogation techniques, controversial interrogation techniques, going to affect him?
I don't think it will affect him because we've now learned, compared to what we knew back then, that he was an administrator. He was not in charge of what was going on, and I think you're going to see people who worked there with him would be able to make that clear. Remember, he withdrew himself. I mean, I think if he wanted to, Obama would have stayed with him.
4 years ago.
Yes, he just did not want to go through that. But he was not in a policy-making position when that happened. And then a couple of years after, you know, the attacks of 9/11, he went back out into the field. So I think that basically, yes, he was there, just like Bob Gates was there during Iran-Contra. Well, you know, we didn't put him in jail. So no, I don't think that that's going to have an impact. In fact, I think the great paradox is going to be if there's any opposition to Brennan, it'll probably come more from the Democrats than from the Republicans as compared to Hagel. But I don't think there'll be very much at all.
Cliff may, but at the same time, he certainly has defended the program. Is that going to make him susceptible and open him up to the criticism? Because it is highly unpopular and under a lot of scrutiny, not just in the United States, but around the world.
I think Larry's right. That may cause some indigestion among some Democrats, but those Democrats are not going to vote against somebody nominated by a president of their own party. So I don't think my guess is his confirmation hearings will not be particularly stormy or particularly lively. My guess is there won't be more than a question or two on
After
this.
After Hagel, they'll be worn out.
After Hagel, they'll be, no, I don't see that. And I think, look, and I've been critical in print at times of John Brennan, but he's a hard-nosed guy. He does know the CIA. He's spent his life and his career there. And he is somebody, and I think this is important, who will be able to have the president's ear. That's often a challenge for a CIA director. My organization, the current chairman is former CIA director James Woolsey, and it's famously joked that he couldn't get an appointment with President Clinton. You know the joke I'm talking about. And that will not be a problem. And I think he is very, very serious, tactically at least, about waging a war against terrorist organizations around the world. I mean, look, the Obama
administration that very seriously.
He has taken that very seriously.
He's a masterful tactician, particularly as a champion of the drone wars, which have killed American citizens without any due process of law, including the son of someone, a 16-year-old. He's been the champion of this kind of drone warfare and covert operations throughout the world, which in some ways could take some of the pressure off of Hagel, because a lot of the trajectory toward war with Iran is covert, is in cyber warfare, is really much under. But
is this going to put a spotlight on a program that the White House has been very, has sort of danced around, has not been always forthright? Is this perhaps going to open that up to scrutiny the White House doesn't want?
Well, this is what I think is the core dysfunction in American politics today. The Democrats have gone AWOL. The left has gone AWOL. There is no Democrat, I don't think, of any seriousness who is going to really challenge and open up the record of drone warfare and the covert war that has become the way of American war since the strategic disasters of invading Iraq and Afghanistan. No Democrat has done that. They've gone AWOL, but it's something the rest of the world sees and really holds the United States in some contempt for.
So what do you make of the fact we have the fact that the Brennan nomination doesn't appear to be too controversial in face value? The Hagel nomination, though, very much the opposite. What is the White House trying to do here by knowingly picking a fight with senators in Capitol Hill that is going to be a difficult one?
The president's trying to get the best people. And I think we got to give him credit for that. I mean, why would you say, oh, let's pick someone who can go through with no controversy, even if they're not up to the standards that I want? I mean, no, I think the president deserves credit, because as I look around, you know, particularly with defense, I don't see anybody who is in the same league as Hagel, given the 23 people, you know, who've had that job before.
Larry, here's what I find difficult to understand. Yes, he has served in Vietnam. Yes, he has in Vietnam won Purple Hearts for being wounded. I don't see how you can say on that basis he's clearly the best person for the job.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying he also is a legislator.
And tell me what he did on national security and foreign policy as a legislator that distinguished him.
Well, basically, he pointed out the fact that the president lied to us about going to Iraq.
He was critical of a Republican president.
Well, he was telling the truth. That's the truth.
No legislation, not one bill.
Truth is actually important in politics.
Can I ask for
accountable?
criticizing the president of the other party is not that difficult. He was wrong on the
He
was wrong on the surge. Let me just put it this way: he was wrong on the surge. I think we can say that. He has no legislative accomplishments.
What about that post-Cold War, the 9/11 GI Bill?
The GI Bill is wonderful for veterans. This is not a national security foreign policy achievement, Larry.
Well, it's very important to recruiting and
let me mention one other thing. He's
10 seconds left, Hillary, last word.
Accountability is critically important. When President Obama first campaigned in 2008, he vowed not just to take our troops out of Iraq, but to change the mentality in our political system that got us into such a strategic disaster. The appointment of someone like Hagel to Secretary of Defense at least goes back to that campaign promise, that he would try to change the mentality that brought us to those kind of strategic disasters in the Middle East.
We'll certainly have to watch and see what happens on Capitol Hill. We are out of time. That is all from the team here in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching Inside Story Americas.